what sustains you? Think about that for a second. What is it that sustains you? I'm not asking you what you enjoy. The question is what sustains you, because to sustain, it should, give comfort, provide encouragement, act as a source of strength, perhaps. Just make it possible to keep going. Now, some of the things you enjoy may do that too, but I think to sustain is something more than that. In the case of Elijah, he was facing a long journey, but after a single day, he prayed for death, saying, "This is enough, O Lord." Now, before you start thinking to yourself about what a wimp Elijah was, that he couldn't even make it a day before he prayed for death, let's back up just a little bit. Talk about what happened before that scene at the broom tree. Because Ahab was the king of Israel before he started looking for Moby Dick. And his wife Jezebel was the queen, and they were not happy with Elijah. You see, those two had taken to worshiping some false gods, and Elijah had just engaged in this contest with the prophets of those false gods, and the whole scene ended with Elijah killing every single one of the prophets. And now Jezebel is threatening to do the same thing to Elijah. So he is not only journeying to God's holy mountain here, he's also trying to escape with his life. So when he's praying for death, Elijah is not just worn out from traveling. He's also sort of consumed with the idea of death, I imagine, knowing that if Ahab and Jezebel catch up with him, he's going to be in some trouble. But luckily, after a brief nap under this broom tree, an angel points out to Elijah that there's something there to sustain him, a hearth cake and a jug of water. Now, it didn't mean the rest of his journey was going to be easy. It didn't even mean he would be spared from the wrath of Jezebel and Ahab. It just meant that whatever happened next, God would sustain him. Elijah received sustenance to continue to zealously serve a God who, in the words of Mother Teresa, as those who were in the intergenerational book club last month will remember, Mother Teresa calls God a God who calls us not to be successful, but to be faithful. So only a little while after he was ready to give up and die, Elijah found the strength and the willingness to continue on through the difficulty and the hardship that lay ahead. He lay down to give up, but instead he got sustenance to keep going. So I ask you again, what sustains you? Now, at this time of year particularly, I think about receiving sustenance through the rest and relaxation of a vacation. Just getting away for a bit to recharge in a different new place. For us this year, the vacation plan was to travel to Michigan. We made our plans a little late, and then right after we decided where we were going to go, when we were going to go, where we were going to stay, Ginny got sick. Like sick. She always tested negative for COVID, but she was not getting any better. And I joked with some of the folks around here at the CSC, asking if anybody wanted to take her place on the trip, because darn it, I was going to go to Michigan. Now, finally, after she was really sick for more than 2 weeks, with what was eventually diagnosed as bronchitis, the doctor told Ginny, go to Michigan. It'll do you good. So just about 2 weeks ago, we left for Saugatuck, and during the drive up, at a rest stop about a half hour from our destination, I noticed that I felt kind of warm. And I decided to take my temperature. And because Ginny was sick, we had all of our sick supplies with us, so I had a thermometer in the car, 101.2. Now, I don't recall using Elijah's actual words at that point, this is enough, O Lord, take my life. As I recall, my thoughts were something closer to great. I've been teasing my wife for 2 weeks now that I was going to go on this trip without her, and now she's going to be the healthy one. We had not even checked into our vacation spot, and now we were looking at having one of us with a fever while the other was a little weak and unsteady, even as she was slowly recovering. Now, I also tested for COVID, and I was negative, but I was pretty sick. And just a side note, I'm afraid I will not be able to provide much information or recommendations about shops and restaurants that we liked on the trip. What I can say is that the place we stayed had a nice, comfortable chair near the TV. But even being sick, we didn't spend the whole time at the rental place. We sat outdoors at the coffee shop, and for meals, we mainly got takeout, but still, there was something that was clearly sustaining us through a vacation that was turning out way differently than we would have expected. And I confess, what sustained us was not attending daily Mass. In fact, I'm pretty sure that the daily Mass goers in Saugatuck Douglas would not have appreciated a couple of sick people exposing them to whatever it was that we had. So, although we will discuss the idea that Jesus is the living bread come down from heaven in just a moment, such living bread was not actually sustaining us through being sick on vacation because we didn't get to go to communion. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean that we locked Jesus out. In fact, I'm pretty sure he was sustaining us, just not in a sacramental way. I think what sustained me, now I won't speak for Jenny here, but what sustained me was closer to what St. Paul talked about in today's second reading, where he told the Ephesians that all bitterness, fury, anger, shouting, and reviling must be removed from you, along with all malice. Now, we didn't quit or give up like Elijah wanted to, but without really even discussing it with one another, we also seemed to decide to be grateful for the light rather than to curse the darkness. I mean, we were in Saugatuck after all. It was nice. Peacefulness tends to come when we can avoid bitterness and anger. You know, we still did get to sit in the sun, and we watched some pretty nice boats float up and down the Kalamazoo River there, and we sat by ourselves on the beach so we wouldn't breathe on anybody, and we just took in the beauty of the dunes and the lake. I think peacefulness is what sustained us on a trip that I can safely say was not what we had planned. But frankly, we're taught by the church that peace can flow directly out of Eucharist. And when I say Eucharist here, I don't only mean consecrated bread and wine, because as you know, the meaning of Eucharist is thanksgiving. And perhaps part of what it means to be a Eucharistic people is to carry that attitude of gratitude rather than falling victim to bitterness, anger, fury, shouting, reviling, and malice. Now, I'm more aware these days that I really do need something to sustain me so that I don't fall into that type of anger and judgment and whatever else may make me want to say sometimes, "This is enough, O Lord, take my life." That living bread come down from heaven, well, it seemed to play a key role in protecting me from bitterness and anger and judgment when I got sick. Now, our church currently still is in a period of several weeks in a row where we're hearing what's known as Jesus' bread of life discourse from the Gospel of John. And today, Jesus repeats what he said last week when the Gospel concluded with him stating, "I am the bread of life." In the bread of life discourse, Jesus makes several of those "I am" statements, and I hope that most of us remember that "I am" is the name that God told Moses was his name from the burning bush. So there's not only stuff about eating bread today, Jesus also is pretty clearly identifying himself with God, saying some things that good Jews just did not say. And part of what's going on with the crowd, I think, as they get upset by what he says, is that instead of considering the question of who Jesus is and how he might sustain them, a lot of those in the audience are leading with their anger and their judgment and their suspicion, and they're closing themselves to the message. Now, absolutely, it's not the message they were expecting. It's as if they got sick in a beautiful vacation spot or were forced into the desert by a vengeful pagan queen, but somewhere in that message there is much that could have sustained them and much that can still sustain us if we choose to listen. The people in the crowd are, in the words of Jesus, murmuring among themselves. They don't seem to want sustenance. Where the Israelites in the desert were sustained by manna and Elijah was sustained by water and a hearth cake, Jesus tells his listeners they literally can be sustained by him. That he is the bread that all of us may eat and not die, the bread of life that will help them put away bitterness, fury, anger, shouting, and reviling. If we don't allow God's grace to help us let go of those things, it can be difficult, even impossible, to hear what God is calling us to do. But make no mistake, God is calling us, inviting us, loving us, keeping those divine fingers crossed that we will move beyond anger, beyond malice, and let Jesus feed us with the food from heaven that we need the most. As he was fleeing into the desert, Elijah realized that he was helpless without God. Those who've spent any time in recovery know that's the first of the 12 steps. Once he admitted that he couldn't do it on his own, Elijah found sustenance. Now, I would venture to guess that if some of that same sustenance is available to us here today, we better pay attention. We better admit that we need it and accept it. Our church teaches that the source and summit of what sustains us is Eucharist. But there are lots of Eucharistic things that can sustain us too, practices that can help us cultivate an attitude of gratitude. In fact, after Mass today, we'll again be showing off several programs that the CSC offers that may help somehow to sustain you. We did something similar last week, but that was mainly about ways to volunteer. This week offers a look into programs that provide sustenance. So check them out after Mass, and maybe, just maybe, the next time someone in a white dress and a green Miss America shawl, or whatever this is, asks you what sustains you, maybe your answer will be a little different than it was just a few minutes ago.